Okay, before we get started, everything I'm about to tell you, 100% true. All right, so if you know anything about George Washington, you probably know this picture. Man's in charge of the nation's first real army. They're not doing so hot against the bigger and better British army, so he throws a Hail Mary and crosses the Delaware River on Christmas Eve, 1776, to sneak up and smack the British in their pasty little faces. And it works. They kick the British out of Trenton, New Jersey. But one of my favorite stories about any president, really, is the other time that Washington crossed the river. All right, so 1753, it's 23 years earlier. We've got all 13 colonies, but they still identify as British, and there's already a lot of drama because they're not treated as, properly British, but whatever. What's important is that the British are butting heads with the French for who gets which territories. The French, by the way, are buddying up with native tribes for a strategic advantage, to which you say, wait, is this the French and Indian War? That starts the next year, so we're getting close. Behind the Allegheny Mountains in Pennsylvania is the Ohio River Valley, which both the French and the British claim. Part of the Ohio River Valley was claimed by the colony of Virginia, not the state of Virginia, the colony, that's important, whose governor was a fellow by the name of Robert Dinwiddie. Dinwiddie asked the crown if he can warn the French that he's going to kick him out of the Ohio River Valley, and then, if they refuse, actually kick him out of the valley. The crown writes back and says, worth a shot. So Dinwiddie writes what I'm sure was a very passive-aggressive letter to the French commanders at Fort Le Boeuf, up in what's now the top corner of Pennsylvania near Lake Erie. He tells him to clear out in the name of the king, and he needs someone to go take the letter from Williamsburg, Virginia to Fort Le Boeuf. But here's the thing. In 2025, with the beauty of modern roads, that's still an 8-hour drive. In 1753, there weren't any roads to the fort. The French had just gone down from Lake Erie, which isn't anywhere near Williamsburg. What is between the fort and Williamsburg is 100 miles of Allegheny Mountains. And it's late October, so whoever's going to deliver the letter has got to do some serious off-roading in the dead of winter. Lucky for Dinwiddie, the equivalent of that tall, quiet kid you went to high school with who went hiking way too much, he volunteers. George Washington is 21. Yeah, I said Washington, it's called a St. Louis accent. Look it up. He's a land surveyor who wants to join the British Army, which kind of also makes him the ROTC kid you know in high school. Shocking, I know. People aren't exactly lining up for this gig, plus George knows a couple important people, and his older half-brother was an officer, so Dinwiddie goes, yeah, alright. He gives him the letter and sends him on his way on October 31st. Now, George doesn't speak a lick of French or any native languages, so along the way he picks up a frontiersman named Christopher Gist, who does speak French, and the two head into the Appalachian wilderness. Now, I'm not going to go into details here, so if you're wondering why I'm not mentioning Half King or Logstown or anything like that, maybe I'll do another video later. What's important is that George and Christopher make it to Fort Le Boeuf on December 11th, which is 6 weeks later. George gives the French commander the letter telling the French to leave the valley. The commander lets him stay and rest up for a few days and eventually gives him the response letter, which says, thanks, but we're not going anywhere. So now they gotta go back. Again, I'm glossing over the details, but now we're in late December and the weather is bad. And their native guide had just tried to shoot them out of nowhere, so they kicked him out and hiked another day and night until they got to the bank of the Allegheny River in Pennsylvania. Now they're not too worried about crossing because it's late December and the weather's bad, so the river's frozen, right? Nope, it's only frozen on the edges. The middle is moving fast, and it's carrying big chunks of ice down the river. But it's only morning, so they have time to think of something. They have a hatchet, so I don't want to pause real quick. Even if I lived in the 1750s, this never would have crossed my mind. They chop down some small trees and build a raft. And to clarify, this is less boat and more logs tied together. And it still takes them all day. But after the sun goes down, they finally slide the raft across the ice and the banks, they hop in, and try to use handmade poles to row to the other side of the river. And as you'd expect, it doesn't go well. Washington writes later, before we were halfway over, we were jammed in the ice, and in such a manner that we expected every moment our raft to sink and ourselves to perish. The ice is smashing in on all sides. The raft is starting to fall apart. They need to try and stop so the ice can pass by, so George puts his pole in front of the raft to stop it. The raft smashes the pole forward, which throws it into the water, along with George. I want to note real quick, hypothermia depends on a lot of different factors we don't always have, but we think it would have set in for George within a few minutes. George manages to grab the side of the raft on the way down, and Christopher pulls him back on board, but depending on who you ask, the raft is either about to capsize or is falling apart. They can't make it to the other side. And they can't make it back to where they came from. It's what we professionals in the business like to call a sticky situation. Fortunately, they spot an island a little ways downstream, so they give up on the raft and make it to the island, where they spend what I assume is a freezing cold and nerve-wracking night. Because really, you still don't know how you're going to make it to the other side. Fortunately, by the next morning, the river's frozen over completely, and George and Christopher just walk across and continue on their way. Eventually, they make it back to Dinwiddie in the middle of January and give him their reply. Again, I won't get into details, but Dinwiddie does give Washington that position in the Virginia militia of the British Army, which kickstarts his military career. And when the French and Indian War starts, Gist helps Washington and his troops navigate the area. And decades later, when Washington's leading the Continental Army across the Delaware River against the British, I have to wonder if he was thinking about crossing the Allegheny almost 23 years to the day before. By the way, if you're in Pittsburgh, the island that Washington and Gist slept on is called Harris Island, or Washington's Landing.